Hi, everybody. I wanted to bring to you tonight how to know if a child is being impacted by a narcissistic parent or dealing with narcissistic abuse. This is such a difficult topic to cover because any type of narcissistic abuse is a constant, relentless attack on the person that the narcissist becomes fixated on. And narcissistic parents in particular are deeply, deeply disturbing people, and the ways that they abuse, control, manipulate their children. The consequences can be devastating. Many children of narcissistic parents turn to substances to numb the pain. They engage in self-harming behaviors, and many of them commit suicide as well. So this is difficult to talk about, but it is so, so important. And I'll share some of my personal story with you as well. The first thing I want to say, though, is that the systems that have been put in place in the United States to help protect children are failing, and they are failing terribly. The systems are grossly overtaxed. The workers are overworked with caseloads that they absolutely cannot get a handle on or control. We see this more and more and more in the news. Children are dying even under the watchful eye of such institutes as Children Protective Services and in other institutions that are put in place solely for keeping an eye out for children, recognizing patterns of neglect and abuse. And it just is impossible in the United States to trust these systems to protect our children. Mandated reporters are not reporting. We have turned into such a litigious society that there is a greater fear of what may happen than there is a care and concern of what is going on with the children, even when the abuse and neglect is glaringly obvious. This is one reason that I teach, train, and do consultation work with educators, with people who are within the legal system, and with law enforcement. I am the product of a severely narcissistic, psychopathic mother. And the father of my oldest son is also a horrifically covert narcissist. I know what I went through. My mother trafficked me sexually. She tortured me in many ways. I was made to do some absolutely horrific things. I'm the family scapegoat, which means everything that happened in my family that was wrong was blamed on me. even if I knew nothing about the situation or what was going on. Even as a child, I was accused of really gross and vile things that, one, no child knows about unless that child has been grossly exposed to it. And because that behavior is modeled by the parent, that becomes the behavior of the toxic family. So the scapegoat becomes the scapegoat for everyone. And there is a system in place in narcissistic families where there is a scapegoat and a golden child and a lot of chaos and confusion. My ex is the exact same way. And the hard thing with narcissists is that they can seem charming. They can look in the world and in society to have everything going for them. Highly educated. Oftentimes they are successful in their careers. And they hide behind these things. They seek constant admiration. And so in their world, narcissists only care about this public perception of them, and they wear a mask flawlessly. In addition to that, they are pathological liars and can look you and every single person dead in the eye and not flinch as they spin the stories that they spin. They come across oftentimes as having been the victim of something terrible, even though they are the predators and the aggressors, and leave a very devastating path in their wake. So sometimes it can be very hard to see. In my case, it wasn't. In my case, I was highly overtly sexual from single digits, frankly, as long as I can remember. I was so neglected that I always wore clothes that were too small for me, had zero grooming habits, self-care at all. My hair was never combed, my teeth were never brushed. I wet the bed until I had started elementary school. I would often stink. I, at a very young age, at age 8, started my period, did not know how to take care of myself, had absolutely horrific acne, didn't bathe properly. So I was just really kind of gross. And because some adults took interest in me, those things began changing. But it was not because of my mother or my 2 older sisters. And with my children, my 2 oldest boys, we at one time had very, very strong relationships, and my ex is deeply, deeply insecure. He is darkly empty. He thrives on this very sick, unhealthy competition. Narcissists always want all of the attention on them. They want to feel like they are the best at everything. So many narcissistic parents alienate the children from the other parent. Polly, the woman who gave birth to me, did that. We were hidden from her husband, taken away And then with my older two children, my ex began more and more and more to isolate them from me. He began to rewrite history, which is also very common in narcissistic parents. They need everything that they say to be the truth. Their version of the truth is what they view as the truth. And so there often cannot be the input of the other parent, because then that would be debunked. These children for narcissists are rarely valued and seen as children. Many children of narcissists parent the parent. A narcissist goes through with every single person the devaluation, dehumanization, and the disposing of the person. There is, for narcissistic parents, there is a need for them to control absolutely everything. And it is terrifying. I know I personally had to go through, even into adulthood, because I didn't understand for so long what was happening or why. It was not until right at about 40 years old, where after decades in therapy and all these things, that finally it was really recognized what it was. And that began the significant changes in my life, and everything came into crystal clear focus. But narcissistic parents are master manipulators, so a lot of this can be very hard to spot. If you don't know, I spent years fighting for my children in the court systems. But if you don't know what it is, or you don't know how to vocalize it, the court system will fail you, and it's happened over and over and over. It's getting better. It's becoming more well known. However, it is still not always accepted. There are court systems in this country who refuse to hear the argument of narcissistic parents and punish some parties for even trying to bring it up. So there's still a lot to be learned in all of this. And fortunately, we're at a place where this is becoming so much better known, so much more understood, and what it looks like and how it plays out. And that's a great thing, because if you've been raised by a narcissistic parent, you are very likely to continue to engage in relationships with narcissists. One, because that is what you know. And so even though this behavior on their part is absolutely disgusting and repulsive, it is normalized. So it's familiar. The other thing is that as a victim of narcissistic abuse, you have been preyed on. And predators know prey. They know weakness and vulnerability. And so until you really begin to understand and fight back against narcissists, you are so prone. I'll share later so many examples of relationships that I engaged in. Friendships, work relationships, obviously the father of my oldest son, because it's what you know, and you don't understand that predators inherently know their prey. So, one thing in with narcissistic parents and toxic families in particular, is that there is usually one child who is forced to bear the burden not only of the parent, but then the siblings as well. They are the scapegoat. I was that, I have remained that, even though I've had no contact with most of my blood for many, many years now. I had to go no contact because it was just becoming life-threatening. The children in my family have been so exposed to this that the suicide attempt rate in my family is, it is just devastating to understand what so many of the people that I love, my nieces, my nephews, my own children, have been subjected to. And because these children become trauma bonded with their parents, they become very afraid to speak out. So the abuse cycles continue. And when they have spoken out, when it is realized that secrets have been exposed, then they recant, they go backwards. The story changes, and the accusations again against the scapegoat become just as vile as what their parents do. So, all right. There are different ways that narcissistic parents can abuse children. So, a huge way that children are abused by their narcissistic parents is that the child is not seen as a child or as an individual. They're seen as nothing but an extension of the parent. And the parent very oftentimes lives vicariously through the child. So the expectation for greatness or perfection or accomplishment is huge on these kids. Should they fail, the punishment or ramifications are horrific. Narcissistic parents on the outside have this very grandiose idea of themselves and who they are in the world, but in reality they're very empty. They're incredibly insecure. They don't know how to love, and they don't know how to have relationships, and so they manipulate and control. And in this abuse situation where the child is the extension of the parent, it turns into a very chaotic and confusing situation for kids, because when the kids are doing what the parent wants or what is expected, then there is high praise and reward. And the minute that doesn't happen anymore, the punishments are terrible. The kid is mocked and put down. The child can become almost non-existent. They are oftentimes ignored. And these kids never have a chance to develop their own identity. And this has happened with my siblings, with nieces and nephews, and my children as well. The narcissistic parent just can't allow that to happen. And because this is the way that they see their children, many of them do engage in parental alienation syndrome, and begin a process of weaponizing the child, of demonizing the other parent, of projecting onto the other parent the things that the abusive parent is guilty of. And all narcissists function in a realm of absolute hatred. And so the children develop a hatred that is not natural for a child towards their parent. No child hates the other parent. That is taught. It's often, much like animals who are taught to be aggressive and detrimental, and that is what happens with children who are forced to become alienated from their parent, and it is heartbreaking. It is so difficult. Again, many of these children end up with substance use disorders. They themselves develop their own personality disorders. There is just so much that happens. One of the most devastating is that they become people pleasers. And that, again, goes back to never developing their own identity. The only reference point that they have is to pleasing this parent in order to be acknowledged or rewarded or held in any place of esteem. And because that is the only way that they know how to function in relationships, that continues, and it is devastating and detrimental into adulthood. So, one of the primary markers of every narcissistic person, but especially narcissistic parents, is the lack of boundaries. They overstep boundaries constantly. They have no respect for a child's privacy, personal space, personal matters. Narcissistic parents barge into a room, or if they're feeling particularly aggrieved, maybe is the right word, they have been known to remove the doors completely, giving the child absolutely no personal or private space whatsoever. My journals were gone through many, many times and used against me. That happens very frequently with narcissistic parents. And then the other opposite side can be true, which is where they strip the child of all personal effects, leave them kind of in a very barren room, and they lock the child in with the lock on the outside so that they can completely control the child in that way. And I have endured that as well. Nearly every narcissistic parent engages in physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, spiritual abuse. It is very rarely known that there is kind of the absence of a form of abuse. The second way that narcissistic parents abuse their children is through guilt trips and control. And this is like the language in my family, and this is the language with my ex as well. The need for them to have the constant control increases this level of manipulation where these children are relentlessly engaged in guilt trips. And in my family, as well as with my ex, guilt trips that engaged the other parent, the kids are rewarded for that. And, every child seeks to please their parent, and it just becomes such a prominent way of functioning. So that, again, this becomes normalized behaviors, even though there is nothing healthy and normal about this. The children are controlled and manipulated, and it's all they know, so they don't know any different. And then the other thing that and the guilt and control, the ways in which the kids are controlled kind of in every aspect, even though they don't realize that. Comes down to kind of this emptiness of the narcissistic parent. They are empty, and they feel very empty in their lives. They have no self-confidence whatsoever. They live in a state of feeling inferior, and they develop like this emotional dependence on, their children. Many of these children end up parenting their parents, and then when it's convenient for the parent, that will be reversed, and all of a sudden, this child who has been adultified is now being infantilized, and it is very, very confusing. I lived this for so long. I never knew what was going on. And it is also a form of gaslighting that creates constant confusion. And narcissists themselves deal in chaos and confusion because that is who they are. While they want to project this incredible self-confidence, the fact of the matter is that they have no confidence whatsoever. They struggle with constantly feeling inferior. Strong people do not engage in this constant level of competition with someone. It just is not how it works. And they engage in this because they're so afraid of losing. Whereas strong people, they have a leadership sense about them. It takes strength to be kind. It is the ultimate form of weakness to only feel strong if you are devastating the life of another or putting people down constantly. And that is how narcissists work. It's why they engage in parental alienation, is because they're constantly threatened by the love and truth and relationship that the children have with a non-narcissistic parent. Polly engaged in this, my ex engaged in this, my middle sister, and these parents take zero responsibility for anything. Nothing is their fault, nothing at all. Everything will be turned and manipulated to the other parent. With my brother, everything was projected onto his ex in horrific ways. She was made to take every financial hit that happened. I mean, just horrific behavior. And many children will see this kind of later as they grow. And they will begin to distance themselves from the narcissistic parent. Okay, so the final way that they engage in abuse of their children is in competition and sabotage. And this to me is the most devastating. This is what I experienced relentlessly in my life. And, it is just to me the most vile behavior. Narcissistic parents are so envious of their children. My oldest son is beautiful. He is 6'4", incredibly athletic. He is incredibly intelligent. And his father is so jealous of him and has been that he has set him up to fail at every step along his life. My son used to, when he would come back from his father's, he would come screaming and crying in the night into my room. Because like my mother, so much abuse happens at night. They disturb the sleep of the child, set the child up to fail in every possible way. For me, I went undiagnosed with ADHD until I, as an adult, finally had it recognized by someone. Now, mind you, my mother works in mental health care. She is responsible for diagnosing people with these things. And this has been like her career. So it wasn't ignorance. It is intentional. They set their children up to fail. They sabotage every opportunity. They sabotage their identity. They sabotage their ability in school, in athletics, in growth. My ex had his fiance at one time. Her child was a drug dealer, and my oldest son began smoking weed thanks to that child at age 10. And they were going around destroying property. Then, just a few years later, he had a drug dealer living with him in their house who was supplying drugs and alcohol not only to my children, but to my nieces and nephews as well. And, my mother sabotaged me and everything about my life, every step along the way. They destroy relationships. They destroy academic careers. For my mother, and my ex attempted it, it is abuse of every single situation. They both tried to financially abuse me. My mother succeeded. She stole my social security number. So before I even knew what debt was, I had debt thanks to her. Later on, she borrowed thousands of dollars from me and it was never repaid. And later on, she stole almost $20,000 of college loans. And it just completely sabotaged me and what I was looking to do. As a mother, I was living in their house, and because she had tried to kidnap my child, I called her out. I would not give my child to her. After they stole all of that money, they kicked me out of their home. And so not only did I not have the financial resources I need, I really had no place to go with my 2 young children. My ex has set my kids up to fail in every way possible. I don't think quite as devastating, but he is, especially of my oldest son, he is so jealous and insecure of my son's looks, his intelligence, his athletic ability, his ability to have relationships, that he has just set him up to fail at every step along the way. And as a mom, it is just heartbreaking. Narcissistic parents want to be the center of everything. All attention and praise on them. So when a child becomes independent and begins succeeding in ways that the narcissistic parent feels are surpassing them, there is nothing that's off boundaries. Nothing. They will do everything and anything to sabotage the child and make sure that the child fails. It's also how they maintain control over them, and is how they support the trauma bond long into life. And this level of competition, by the way, it is with everything. My mother used to, it was everything. My mother used to say, that her feet were more narrow than mine. And so listen, I don't care, right? It doesn't matter to me. It didn't matter then. It certainly doesn't matter now. But when I would just agree with her because it was something I really didn't care about, her husband would tell me that I'm so stupid and and it is just because after a lifetime of this heedless, needless competition and sabotage, you just come to understand that none of it is important, none of it is relevant in truly living life. So that kind of wraps up the different types of narcissistic abuse for narcissistic parents against their children. As with all narcissists, these parents function in a way that isolates their children from true, real support systems. They live in a world of secrecy, unhealthy secrets, and a constant world of lying and deceit. They rewrite history. They project the things that they do onto the scapegoat. I mean, hatred is really what I've known primarily my whole life. And it is because that is the way in which they function. When narcissistic parents are controlling and deceiving and manipulating and sabotaging, they get this glint in their eye. And it is one of the only times that you will see like this delight in a narcissist, and it's terrifying. They believe that rules don't apply to them. So my ex was constantly deceiving the courts and deceiving me and believing that none of it applied to him. And they are so good. They are such master pathological liars and manipulators that you don't even realize everything that's happening. So I hope that this lends insight. This is a very hard, deep topic of conversation. If you recognize any of these in children who you love, especially things like neglect, kids who are being starved, unnaturally thin. I was always unnaturally thin. I always smelled. I was unkempt. That are clearly, many children are compared to their siblings when they go to like the same schools. But if there is a child who is clearly very different than the other siblings, that child is not just being abused, that child is the scapegoat child. And it needs to be recognized more. And because the systems in place to protect children just are failing, we as a society, as a community, have got to start speaking up for kids more and more. So I hope that this is helpful in how narcissistic parents function. And tomorrow I'm going to go through how do we as adults know and understand that we are in narcissistic relationships, or that we are, within these toxic families and the roles that we are forced to play. I hope that you all have an amazing night and take care of yourself and one another.